Fellow members of the Association of Oldest Inhabitants of the District of Columbia. And I'd like to welcome you all here today. And I'd like to say on a happy note that I've been informed that we have 85 people here at lunch today. We are near capacity in this room, as you can see. Not many places we could squeeze in another table. So thank you for all for coming. And I think we have a really exciting program today. So let me begin with our routine work. And first of all, I will entertain a motion to dispense with the reading of the minutes of the last meeting. Do I hear a motion? I see a motion. Do I hear a second? Okay, let's vote on it. All in favor of dispensing with the reading of the minutes? Aye. And the ayes appear to have it. Next, I will ask our trustee treasurer to give us a report on the state of our finances as an association.
We're live.
And this is Carolyn, whom most of you know, I'm sure.
Well, treasurer's report. We have about $2,200 in our checking account, so we're on track to pay our operating expenses until the next membership round. And membership, speaking of membership, we have a new member, one new member this time, Jacqueline Sapp. And she lives in Springfield, Virginia, and she is, her ancestors are James and Lorraine Sapp. She's a proposal writer and an alumni of H.D. Woodson School in DC, and she learned about AOI through the NPR.
Oh.
She's excited about being involved.
Thank you, NPR. Make that a weekly announcement and we'll be that much happier.
That's the first. Now, we have some members who joined, and this may be their first time at a luncheon, so I'd like to recognize them and introduce them to the... identify yourself.
I'd like to introduce my guest, Joe Fontaine. He's interested in joining the AOI from North Carolina. Did you hear any of that?
Yes. I did.
He's from North Carolina, a retired architect, and has been a resident of the district for 41 years.
Hear, hear.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm Sherry Sewell, native Washingtonian and an alumni of H.D. Woodson.
Did you know Jacqueline Sapp by any chance? Okay. Welcome.
I'd like to introduce Debbie Handrahan as my guest here today. She is a resident of Washington, D.C., very near here.
Carolyn?
Hi, I've been a member for several months, but I never got the opportunity to introduce myself, Rick, who brought me into this club. Anyway, my name is Marcy Cohen. I'm retired, and I will not tell you about my past because you may not like me.
Well, welcome anyway.
And
I wanted to speak very briefly about the beautiful garden that this club maintains. I've lived in the neighborhood since the mid-'60s, and this garden has improved the quality of the landscape around DuPont Circle, and it's inspiring other people to follow suit.
My name is Judy Hubbard, and I'd like to introduce my guest, Peggy Robin. Peggy and I are both members of the Cleveland Park Historical Society, and Peggy has the,
Well, I've lived in the DC metro area since 1967, and in DC proper since 1976.
and is the moderator
Of the Cleveland Park listserv, the biggest community listserv in the U.S.
Okay. Oh, wait a minute. We have some.
My table made me aware I neglected to inform you. My family's been in Washington, D.C. since 1820.
Here, here.
And I have the privilege of having what I believe is the original charter document for the AOI when it was a colored organization. So I'd like the opportunity to share it one day.
Hope you consider joining.
And I will, are we finished? No, not quite.
Last but not least, one of my high school alum, Tim Hannaful.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tim Hannaful, and I'm so glad to be here. And Carolyn and I went to Woodrow Wilson in 1977, class of 77, and it's not Woodrow Wilson anymore. It's Jackson Reed, so I thank you for putting that picture.
Yay! And Tim spearheaded the movement to change.
And I see in the back of the room someone who's too modest to stand up, but a friend and colleague of long time standing, Richard Best, worked with me for many years in the Congressional Research Service at the Library of Congress. So, Dick, welcome aboard. We're very happy to have you.
Thank you very much. I was encouraged to join by Nelson Lyman Snyder. I've lived in the neighborhood since the 1970s. I'm happy to be here.
Great. And Nelson, there you are, Nelson. Thanks for recruiting. Now,
I just wanted to make one more. Cindy, our vice president, her parents are here. I thought maybe she'd like to introduce them to.
I've got a big mouth, so I'm just going to talk.
Okay.
My parents, Alberta and Charles Gueli, actually their roots also go back to DC. My dad worked with PABC and HUD for many years as an urban planner, worked on the redevelopment of the Willard Hotel.
bravo.
My mom's grandfather was a stonecutter who worked on the National Cathedral, and her mother went to the Providence Nursing School, Providence Hospital Nursing School. So while we're New Yorkers by birth, the tentacles of DC reach a very, very long way. So thank you.
One more.
And with respect to the magnificent restoration of the Willard, which is now, about 30 years in the past, 35 years in the past? In-laws of a friend of mine came to Washington once to visit, and the husband and the wife were there, and we had gone for dinner, and we went to the Round Robin for drinks afterwards, and we went out, and she started down Peacock Alley, and she started to cry. And I said, why? I can't remember her name now. And she said, when I was a young woman, I was a war worker in Washington, and we would come to dances at the Willard. And I remember Peacock Alley, and it looks now as it did then, as beautiful. And so, kind of a wonderful story about the continuities that we're happy to have the good things in Washington.
But one more thing, Bill Brown has some in memoriam.
Bill?
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I do have some news that just sort of came out today. One is just sort of a status of health of one of our members. Many of you may remember, might remember Cara Livia Heron, who's an active member, and her mother, Georgia Heron. And Georgia's in hospice care with her daughter, Cara Livia, at their home. Georgia was something, if you'll recall, before the pandemic, Kim Bender had done a program on the Myrtilla Minor Normal School, which has, over the years, become UDC, right? And Georgia Heron had been a student at the Myrtilla Minor School before it became DC Teachers College and all of its evolutions through Federal City College and now UDC. So say a little prayer, think about Georgia, and Cara Livia, of course, being the caregiver as well. I heard from Loretta Newman-Smith today that her husband Dan passed away yesterday. Loretta has been a past speaker, longtime member of AOI, a past speaker. She was the president of the Civil War Preservation Trust. She was very active in the preservation group for the Circle Fort Parks and all. Dan has recently been on, and I don't think I can decipher the link here, not that anyone can remember it, but he was on CBS News within the last few months or so because he was a slave descendant and his grandfather, I'm glad someone's fact-checking me, was still alive, that Dan was able to get firsthand stories and all from him. So Dan passed away, and I'm sure his obituary will appear in the paper in short order. Finally, my last thing, and I was saddened to see this today, is she's not an AOI member, but you're going to sort of freak out over the connection and all when I tell this brief story. Adam, I'm not trying to take your job, okay? Dolores Mounsey was the granddaughter of William Nixon, okay? And Ms. Sewell, who's one of our newer members, who just mentioned the Association of Oldest Inhabitants Colored Incorporated, which was the African-American parallel organization to this organization. Dolores Mounsey's grandfather had been the president of Association of Oldest Inhabitants Incorporated from 1942 to 1962. Nelson and I had as our quest for years, I mean back 20 years ago or longer, trying to find the records of this mysterious organization that just sort of evaporated. No one knew anything about it. So we put out these pleas in the newspaper. John Kelly wrote about it. AOI's looking for the records of the other AOI, so on and so forth. Nothing. Till one day I get a call from James Good, you all know the historian, architectural historian from the Smithsonian. He's doing research on his latest book before he died on a Art Deco house in the Palisades, taking pictures, talks to the homeowner. Well, no, I didn't own this house, but it was designed by William Nixon. Here's his granddaughter's phone number, Dolores Mounsey. Good tracks her down in Silver Spring. They're in her basement, spreading through all this stuff about the architects and design and all of this home that he had built. And Good looks down and sees these binders full of the Association of Oldest Inhabitants Colored photo albums. So we're like, oh my goodness gracious. So Nelson and I put the red lights and sirens and all on, go out to Dolores's place, talk to her, examine all this stuff, and convinced her, and this was difficult to do, convinced her and her sisters to transfer all of his materials to Moreland Spingarn Library at Howard. And we did some liaison to make sure that they would accept them as opposed to the DC History Center, because we thought it was more appropriate. Moreland Spingarn accessioned all of the materials, digitized them all, provided Dolores and her sister back with copies of all that, and there's now the William Nixon Archives at Moreland Spingarn. So in filling Sherry Sewell in on all this intricate history today, and she has this beautiful certificate from 1915, I suggested that she may, if she wants to part with it rather than cut it into quarters for she and her siblings to share, that she approached Moreland Spingarn that at some point that might be the appropriate place for this charter certificate to appear. So that's my, sort of sad news, but in a good way. We've got a new member who's affiliated with that organization, and between Nelson and me and James Good, of course, and Dolores, we wouldn't have known about all this stuff had it not been for that serendipitous discovery. And all this is on our webpage. So check out the website if I left something out. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill. And now I would like to call upon our redoubtable historian, Nelson Ryman Snyder, whom I've known for, what, Nelson, since 1972? At least.
Well, that's great. I'm glad that Bill mentioned about the oldest inhabitants colored ink, because I worked for many years for the Committee on the District of Columbia, and when that committee was dissolved in 1992, many of its records were ready to be tossed. And I was no longer with the committee, but I was called and said, Ryan, you got to come up here and look at this stuff. Well, I took 40 boxes to my house. Today, I couldn't do that. I couldn't even drive into the into the garages and pick this stuff up. And recently, I've been going through some of this stuff, and I found that in 1921, both organizations testified together, the oldest inhabitants and our organization, on the Hill before the District of Columbia Committee for elected a local government in the District of Columbia. And so that will go to the Moreland Spring Arm. And it's just a wonderful find. I couldn't believe it when I found this. It was just remarkable. I went to the opening of what used to be the Historical Society of Washington. It's now the DC History Center this past week. And I have some handouts on it if you want to contact the organization. Please go down and see what they have set up there. It's just wonderful. The exhibits, they have a wonderful bookstore, and look, check that out. Right now, they're by appointment only, mostly, so I have the information you can call. I have some handouts for that, so come and see me about that. And about the DC History Center. It's what they're doing there is really remarkable. Okay, now we come to the trivia question.
It's open for the library and the archives. The exhibit area is open Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Just walk in anytime.
Anytime.
No fee.
Okay, good.
Did everyone hear that?
Say that again.
It's just the archive/library that you need an appointment.
You have to have an appointment.
Yes, they'll do it. They're very cooperative. Just make a phone call, send them an email. But the exhibit space is open Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, free. Walk around. Second floor of the Carnegie Library.
And go and see the neighborhood alone, too. What has happened in the neighborhood, I haven't been over there in years. And it's wonderful. You can go there and spend the day. They have restaurants that have opened up. I recommend the Rebel restaurant. It's right next door, and they have wonderful food. And it's Rebel something. I can't remember what the rest of it is. But it's a wonderful place, and there are all kinds of eateries in the area. It's really a booming area now. I was really quite impressed, and this will help the society as well. And okay, the trivia question. Last meeting we had Eisenhower in the White House, and he proposed when he came in, the District of Columbia vote for president and be represented in the House of Representatives as though we were a state. He put that in as an amendment to the Constitution. He was able to get through the vote for president. The vote in the House of Representatives didn't make it. It got through the Senate twice. It was defeated in the House by the Southern Democrats, which really controlled the House of Representatives, as we know, for 100 years. They didn't lose the Civil War. They really didn't. They controlled Congress for 100 years, the South. And so my question is, how many electoral votes do we have? And before that, is anybody here, the first election was 1964. We voted for president. The lines were huge. Polls were kept open after 10 o'clock at night to accommodate everybody. And the turnout was over 90%. Almost 150,000 people voted. And because we hadn't voted for anything here for 100 years. So it was quite an event. People were just hugging one another and crying in the streets. The accounts of it are just amazing to read. When you think of the elections we have now, they're kind of boring experiences in ways. And so that's my question. The trivia question is, and of course we have a basic rule. If you won the trivia question before, no, don't. We want to get some new blood in here. So how many electoral votes has anybody voted? Did anybody here vote in the 1964 election? Okay. Do you have any anecdote from that to share with us?
It was a thrill. It was a thrill.
Okay.
Well, I voted in Southeast at a school, and my picture was in the Evening Star because I was voting.
Oh boy.
We had like paper, we had cardboard, cardboard shields around where you voted.
Well, you get the first guess. How many votes? Maybe we should just give it to this lady. Pardon? You've got it on 2 accounts. You've won the trivia question. Good, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I'll get it. I got 2. I got to give her the right one because this guy gets one too. And you don't even have to guess.
Well, thank you, Nelson. It's interesting. I have not done the calculations, but Washington, D.C., as you know, has experienced a resurgence in growth in population. And the population, which had fallen considerably in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, is now at new heights. And I can't tell you exactly what it is, but it's over 700,000, 750,000, maybe upwards. And D.C. actually has larger population than, I believe, 5 states. So it's something to think about. Wyoming, Vermont, Delaware. No, Alaska probably is grown. Anyhow, interesting point. And now I'd like to begin our main event of the day, and this is something that's very exciting that we've all been thinking about. And I was thinking about it last weekend when I read the remarkably graceful Washington Post obituary of Angela Lansbury, of whom I was a great fan. I saw her in a roadshow revival at Shady Grove of happy memory of Mame, and I also saw her more recently in Blithe Spirit at the National. So, our guest speaker today is Adam Bernstein, who is the obituarist for the Washington Post, and we are going to try a new, and we hope you'll find interesting format. Cindy Gueli, our vice president, is going to, and Adam are going to be up here in these chairs, and we're going to have basically an interview Q&A session. So I hope you enjoy it, and onward and upward.
Adam Bernstein has been putting the Post in the Washington Post since 1999 as obituary writer and editor. The American Society of Newspaper Editors recognized Adam's ability to exhume the small details and anecdotes that get at the essence of the person and to write stories that are complex yet stylish. He's featured in Marilyn Johnson's book about the obit writing craft, The Deadbeat. Among the obituaries Adam has written, his favorites are those of Edward von Kloberg III, the lobbyist for directors and despots and who embraced the slogan, "Shame is for sissies," and the filmmaker Billy Wilder, who wooed his future wife with the line, "I'd worship the ground you walked on if only you lived in a better neighborhood." He grew up in the Bronx, Boston, San Antonio, and rural Connecticut, and has no discernible regional accent. He received an undergraduate degree from the University of Virginia and a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University. He has won Society of Professional Journalists Awards for featured writing, and this year took second place in the Society for Features Journalism contest for feature specialty writing for his obits of Fanny Fox, Cloris Leachman, and Cicely Tyson. The judges called the stories the art of the obit at its finest, detailed reporting, cultural context, and just enough reverence for the subject. The death of Fanny Fox, the stripper who brought down Wilbur Mills, likely would have gone unnoticed but for Adam Bernstein's advanced reporting. The result captures in glorious detail the classic DC scandal. In addition, one of Adam's non-obit feature stories for the Post led to the reprinting of Roger Hall's comic memoir of World War II espionage, You're Stepping on My Cloak and Dagger, and Adam subsequently wrote a screenplay. Anyone with a few $1 million they'd like to put in service of art is encouraged to see Adam after today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, Adam Bernstein and AOI's Vice President and today's moderator, Dr. Cindy Gueli.
We're going from, and now it's on, there we go. So we're going from living history, living DC history, to not so living history with Adam here. I want to kind of start maybe at the beginning with your beginning. You joined the Post in 1999, but it seems that you had a connection you felt a connection first to Obituaries because of a zoot suit. So would you like to tell us about the zoot suit?
Yes, I'm not. Is this working? Does this work? Does this work? I feel like a little like Elvis. Yes, I'm not wearing the zoot suit today, as you can see, but the zoot suit was I was working in Bakersfield, California in 1996, and you know, like Rick in Casablanca, I went there for the waters. And I was a general assignment reporter in Bakersfield. And one day I got a package of newspaper clippings from back home. My family was in Connecticut, and it was a New York Times obit for a guy named Harold C. Fox. And because I can't memorize every single word of it, I figured I'd share with you what the story said. If you don't mind me reading from this. All right. Harold C. Fox, the Chicago clothier and sometime big band trumpeter who claimed credit for creating and naming the zoot suit with the reed pleat, the reeve sleeve, the ripe stripe, the stuff cuff, and the drape shape that was the stage rage during the boogie-woogie rhyme time of the 1940s, died at his home in Sarasota. It was just shy of over the top, but it worked beautifully. It was funny. I mean, as you were saying, I'd never laughed at a newspaper article before. I later read the AP version of it just to see if it would have had the same impact, and here's what the AP story had to say. Harold C. Fox, whose stylized zoot suit was the uniform of trendsetters of the 30s and 40s, has died. It reads like a tombstone, and it made all the difference to me because it was lively. The Times version, not to praise the competition too much here, but it was lively, and it was exciting for me as a young journalist at the time to see something that you could actually have fun with journalism. After, basically spending the time covering just whatever there was to write about, it was the first time that I had. So I went to the editor and I said, "Can I please write an obituary?" And he looked at me aghast and, "Really? You want to do that?" I begged and pleaded, and he finally relented. And I had to write an obituary writer, an obit for I still remember, it was an oil field worker. His last name was Bowden, and his nickname was White Shoes, because he was apparently so good at his job that he could walk with impunity into the oil fields with white shoes on and not get them mussed up. So I figured, oh, this is colorful. So I interviewed his whole family, and it was over the top, down to what cigarette he liked, and it was just filled with irrelevant detail. But I was determined to try and paint a more human picture of this guy than what the standard obituaries were in the Bakersfield Californian at the time. And I was just captivated. That moment on, that was my ambition. And when I got to the Post just 3 years later, I was working on the TV desk initially for the old TV Week section. And one of the obituary writers died. I'm sure you have your own jokes in your head about that one. But he died on the job. And so there was an opening. And I went to the editor of the newspaper and I said, I really want that job. And he looked at me like I was nuts. Because anybody who came to the Post is usually ambitious for, Paris bureau chief or something like that. And that's never what I wanted. And so they put me through the ringer, 10, 12 interviews, why do you want this? They're trying to ferret out something, is there something wrong with me or something? And finally, I got it probably through default because of what the section was at the time. We were still kind of coming out of the phase where the obituaries job was sort of seen as a backwater, a place where you went if you either spent your final years either in retirement or your life, or you had problems with other people in the newsroom, and as it turned out, the guy who wrote the lead on that other obit, the Harold C. Fox one, was sort of like one step away from getting canned by the New York Times. His whole he was hired in 1962, as I vaguely recall, hired in the early 60s, and it was just like they kept him on. He did all kinds of stuff, and he was always failing out, and they finally gave him one final chance on the obits desk, and he bloomed. Because the one thing you have on the obits is freedom, because not enough editors care. Which is the pleasure of the job. So I found in this position freedom of writing, which I'd always, I liked doing playwriting before I went into journalism, so I found a creative outlet, first of all. Freedom, so you weren't, constantly looked over your shoulder, the top editors weren't constantly rewriting you, and it wasn't story by committee. And I love the scope of the job, because you had the excuse to write about anybody, anywhere. And there's sort of a vicarious nature to it. I'm sorry if I'm going on a little long here, but there's the vicarious nature in that, we're not out interviewing people most of the time, right? Most of the people we write about have died. Or because we're writing about somebody who died, let's say, in Peru or London. We're not, and it has to be done right there and then, and we just don't have the time. So there's a little bit of vicarious nature that you either like or don't like, but it's an opportunity to discover and teach readers about stuff that fascinates you. And so that, to me, has always been the pleasure at that time when it was far less appreciated than it is now. We can talk if you like, later about some of the history of how the nature of the job has changed in general, the industry, the view of obit writing. But to answer your question in a long-winded way, as the Daily Telegraph once wrote in one of its wonderful euphemisms about people who tend to be long-winded, he relished the cadences of the English language. So I'll end it there for the first question.
You're talking about changing. And I think in a 2020 interview, you mentioned that Jeff Bezos taking over the Washington Post is one of the best things to happen to the obit desk. Can you explain that? Why was that such a good thing? What kind of changes has he made or enabled you to make?
Sure. Well, we talk all the time. I was discouraged from shaking his hand when he came into the building. But he's been, as you know, as people who I really appreciate being here for several reasons. Among them, you're probably the only people like me who are aware of so much of DC history. You know, the old Central High School is probably not news to many of you. You know, Minor Teachers College, I'm deeply familiar with from having written about many graduates. So, but as you know, you probably keep an eagle eye on the Washington Post and what it has done over many, many years. And you probably are aware of what has happened to the newspaper over the course of, let's say, the last 30, if my math is right here. So, you know, throughout the 80s and 90s, the newspaper was great, was in great shape. You know, we couldn't take in enough advertising, and you know, we had bureaus everywhere, and it was you know, you got your newspaper every day. It was relatively thick, and the Sunday edition, you know, was a doorstop. And then, as you know, because of what has happened to the industry in general, the advertising plummeted. The policy of the owner at the time was, the Graham family was to keep it local because that's where the advertising was, and it was a smart move until it wasn't, because it all went away. And then the newspaper was sold. It went through a rocky period, as you know, and we just kept shedding staff and reducing our vision for what a newspaper should be. And then Bezos came in, and it was just money, 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 money. And as you know now, I mean, I can't even tell you how many. If I go to the newsroom, I don't know anybody anymore because it's you know, it's like a city of 1,000 people, and we have bureaus. You know, we have a full-time bureau in London and Seoul, South Korea, in addition to just reporters everywhere, and it's really hard to keep track of. But what it's meant for me is that he's open to the world, which is what my vision has always been for my section. It wasn't always my section, but I took over about 12 years ago, and have always been, even as a writer only, sort of a champion of writing about the most fascinating people wherever they are, locally, nationally, internationally, because I think readers here in this very cosmopolitan city care about the world and your relationship to the world, in addition to your relationship to the community. So for me, it was very good because I didn't have somebody looking over my shoulder all the time saying, why can't you just run wire on that? For many years, it was, why do I care about you know, an actor or an actress? You know, I remember vividly, you know, I'm a big old movie buff and know something about television, but the actress Bonnie Franklin died, and she was on
One Day at a Time.
One Day at a Time, thank you, which was on TV for 10 years, which is a lifetime for the, you know, for many people. And one of the top editors says, who's going to care about that? She's been off TV for many, many years. She's not, you know, she's obviously not a major star. But I said, but she was on TV for a long time. She was in people's living rooms. You know, people probably care more about her than they do a lot of other, you know, so-called important people. And I just said, you know, it doesn't have to be huge, but we should do something to acknowledge that she means something to some people. And sure enough, it was the best read story of the year. Excuse me, let me take that back. Best read obit of the year. It's like 500,000, 600,000 clicks, which is pretty big. I mean, I think, you know, Antonin Scalia got 800 or something. So I mean, you know, say what you will about their varying impact. It's still a very significant number of people who care. And so, you know, just to answer your question.
So it's the money, you mentioned money, so money coming in.
Well, it's money, but also the view that our goal now is to reach, you know, everybody in the world, as opposed to just very narrowly focused. If it doesn't have to do with DC, don't cover it, which it was for several years.
I believe the obituary when the Queen just died was online within a minute of the official announcement of her death. So certainly wide-reaching. You mentioned London, you mentioned money, that's certainly the Queen. Why so important to have it available so quickly? Obviously, she's a big figure, so you have a pre-written, I assume, obituary for somebody of that kind of importance.
Right. We did have the Queen. Several years, going back about 10 years before that, there had been an actress, sort of second tier, not Bonnie Franklin, but somebody else who was sort of a second tier movie actress that I never really I didn't really know who she was. And I got a call one day, it was a weekend, saying, do you have something prepared? We need to go up with it. And I said, I frankly I've never heard this person before. But the bottom line was she was trending online, back when that was sort of the new language. I said, that's nice, but I don't know if anyone's going to know her. And sure enough, it went huge. And so at that point, we were made vividly aware that it was our mission to prepare we do a lot of advanced obituary writing, but it was imperative that we're ready, because as we know, virtually everybody will die. And it was imperative that we were prepared as best as humanly possible. We have a very small desk, and we're supposed to cover basically the world. And it's very difficult to prepare advanced obituaries, as you can imagine, without a lot of, the New York Times discovered this 30 years ago, or 40 years ago. So they have a much bigger storehouse of advanced obituaries than we do, but we have about 900 right now. And it's taken about 10, 12 years to do that, with a combination of a small team and a small group of freelancers. So when the Queen died, we were definitely ready. The joke in England was that in England, she outlived many of she was the best account you could have if you were an advanced obit writer, because it was just you'd have to refresh it every so many years, and you get paid to do it. And the same with like Strom Thurmond here was basically, he outlived like 5 computer systems and 3 or 4 obit writers, and the same for the Queen. And so we were ready with her, and it was just a frantic. The day was rather dramatic because the writer who had, somebody you might know, Adrian Higgins, who was a longtime gardening columnist for the Post, wrote it. He's British. And I figured he would have a vested interest in seeing it done right, as he lives in England now and would probably get tarred and feathered if he got it wrong. And he did, I thought, a very good job. And we had it ready. I sent it to him that day for any final updates, which he made. And literally within like, actually that day there was BBC, we were told, step back, there were 3 places we could rely on for accurate dissemination of news after the Queen had died. The Buckingham Palace would announce it in a statement, BBC would put out a statement announcing she had died, and then some other place that was deemed reliable. I don't think it was The Guardian, but it wasn't a newspaper, it was like some... Yeah, Fox. I can't remember. Somebody at BBC put out an announcement that she had died before it was true. And so we were like, oh, no. And somebody fortunately caught it in time. But sure enough, Buckingham Palace then put out a statement, and within seconds, it was boom, out.
I see you. I'm envisioning somebody sitting at the computer over the send button, just waiting as everybody was.
Well, what happened was now that we have literally, 1,000 people, including lots of people in London, we had every hand. These are not my favorite obits to do because everybody gets involved and nobody can make a decision. So. We had all these bells and whistles attached to the story, photo galleries and old radio clips and video, links to other stuff and a photo gallery and everything. But nobody had taken the time to say, well, who's the one person who's going to absolutely confirm it? So finally a decision was made from the highest echelons of the paper, this person will. It wasn't me because I was just the obit editor. I was responsible for the story, but then you have all these other things. And so there was a person a couple layers above me who was given the authority to hit the button, and that's how it went out. But literally within seconds, the Washington Post beat, lots of other places. I was proud of that because it is a very competitive line of work, even though you don't necessarily associate it with competition.
Along those same lines, the Queen and Fanny Fox, so we'll mention them in the same breath. Can you tell us about your detective work in being able to bring Fanny Fox's story kind of back to attention, and we might not have even known that she had died had it not been for your work?
Right. Well, yes, there are two opposite ends of the spectrum for sure. So, you know, I picked her just to have something prepared because I knew she was of a certain age that it would be required. Ultimately, she'd be a fascinating piece to have in the newspaper. And I'd always been intrigued because of the line I heard Wilbur Mills say years ago. I mean, this is, I don't know, 20 years ago, somebody told me the story about Fanny Fox. I'm not a DC native, so I didn't really know who she was until I came here. And the story the line that always amused me was Wilbur Fox saying, on the campaign trail, after he was caught in the scandal, what did you learn from this? And he said, never drink champagne with a foreigner. It was a great lesson he took from this. And I thought, you know, that's a great line to have in the story. And I'd always been intrigued, you know, from what I told you about Harold Fox, I'd always been of the belief that every great story needs to have at least one joke in it. Or something humorous, something to capture your attention right from the start, because you have so many stories competing for your attention. So Fanny Fox to me seemed like a colorful person, to say the least. And I took time, this was maybe about 2 years ago at this point, 2020, I want to say, 2020. And I read all the clips about her. I interviewed a guy who wrote a book about DC scandals, because I didn't want it just to be a clip job. And he said, you know, he gave me a little bit of, you know, context for the story, which is that right after Watergate, you know, every reporter was looking to make his or her name with a scandal. And so the city was sort of ripe for a moment like this. So it gave it a little historical context. And then I read her own book, which she had ghostwritten with the woman who wrote, I can't remember. She had ghostwritten the book with another famous author, the woman who wrote the Mayflower Man. And so I read it. It was actually a very kind of poignant, strangely poignant, quickie book. And it gave a lot of details that were not in the newspaper accounts at the time, because everybody got her name wrong. Everything was wrong. And then she very wisely kind of disappeared. You know, she tried to capitalize a little bit on the fame. It didn't work well. There were obviously a lot of, you know, beyond the fun of the silliness of the scandal. There was also a very poignant side to her life, which is a lot of abuse, a lot of drug use and alcohol. And one of her children died. You know, it was just not I don't like to make fun of people through the story, but it's sort of a multi-dimensional story. So you had sort of the humor of it, but also the very deep, poignant side. And I tried to write the piece. So the piece is done. I figured this is somebody who is not going to want to publicize the news of the death when it happened. This family would, because of how destructive the scandal was to her. But I knew that they would probably place some sort of announcement. And I also knew that despite everybody believing she had returned to her native Argentina, she actually lived in Tampa. And I confirmed it through all kinds of record sources. So every 2 weeks, and you might say what you will about this, but every 2 weeks I would search, just her real name and her married name, just to see if anything popped up. And it was a Saturday, and I was sitting there just kind of watching TV and flipping through, and sure enough, her name pops up in a death notice in the Tampa Bay Times. I said, "Is this really true?" And I was like, "Oh, I thought, oh my, I'm going to break this story." So I tried to call the family. One of them told me to go jump in a lake. And so I couldn't confirm it through them. So what I spent the next 2 days doing is trying to hunt down, through calling every funeral home in the Tampa Bay area, and also had a friend who lives in that area, and I asked him to go to the Office of Vital Statistics to get a death certificate, which would confirm that it was her, unequivocally. So it took till Tuesday to do that. So I was, oh my God, I hope nobody else finds out in Tampa Bay. Or whatever. I called her lawyer, because she got into a lot of legal spats over throughout the 80s and 90s. And I called the lawyer who represented her, and he had no idea who she was. He only knew her under the married name as just some regular person who seemed to have a lot of legal trouble. And I I asked her, can you get in touch with somebody? Can you confirm that just the details of who, this is who it was. And we finally got it on the Tuesday, and we published it, and I told the web page, the homepage of the newspaper, get ready. And sure enough, they made a nice big splash with it. And then I had it for hours before the New York Times finally came in. I guess it only illustrates just, again, it's competitive. I like to find people whose greatest achievement, and this is where obits are vastly different from what a lot of news reporting is, which is what happened right now, right nearby, quick, tell me. And try and tell a life whose most important moment may have been 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, and try and make it compelling and relevant to readers now. And I thought her story, in all its various dimensions, would do it. And so that's how it happened.
So that was a lot of detective work, obviously, on your part to get to Fanny Fox. That was a story that kind of you went after, but sometimes it comes to you. So you were, I think, just starting at the Post, or recently at the Post, when 9/11 hit, and you were spearheading the section during COVID. So these kind of mass casualties that are happening. You deal with death every day, but this has to be on such a different level. How does one get your arms around something like that? And how do you decide over all the people that have perished in these kind of tragedies, who to focus on and who to highlight?
9/11, I was very new to the paper, so I didn't really, I can tell you about one 9/11 experience. It was, they had me go out, nobody knew anything about what was happening, and I remember just going out in the streets and everybody was confused, and as some of you might remember, people didn't know if another plane was going to come and hit DC, so it was just mass confusion. And then all the federal workers, finally went home, and so the street was then empty. It wasn't so much 9/11 that I was involved with as much as afterwards, and everybody was fanned out to give, not just obit writers, but everybody on the staff was basically asked to locate one of the families who had suffered a terrible tragedy and try and write a little brief about the person who had died. I wasn't overly smitten with the approach, which was just show up unannounced, because then it's harder for somebody to turn you away. So I did it. It wasn't 9/11, I didn't play a massive role. I just did a couple of those stories. It was not the most pleasant. I talked to people. They were very nice about it, but it was a very sad and awful experience. COVID is a very different kind of, had a very different kind of impact for the obits desk, because it just was constant and continuing. It wasn't one event where you have a finite number. It was just endless. And the problem for us was that we started, as soon as some well-known person was announced, it was announced that that person may have had COVID, we suddenly had to prepare the advance obit, because it was just taking people left and right. And so I remember when Boris Johnson was diagnosed and it was in the ICU, I told my wife, you will not see me for the next week. I have to go up to the attic and basically, please leave me alone. I need to get this done. This is, he'd be the first world leader to die of this disease. And so I immersed myself in the world of Boris Johnson.
We feel for you, yes.
Or Bojo, as I now call him. But it was literally, we had to write about all kinds of people. There were all it was just a lot of work. But the aspect of it that I thought was most poignant was this, and what the role that I thought obituaries could play in COVID is everybody was isolated. Everybody was living in their own homes, scared as hell. Nobody knew, and these are, for the first year when no vaccines were available. And I remember the way I thought about it was, especially with my belief that we should be writing about people all over, is that obituaries have a special responsibility to make you care about somebody who you don't know, who may live thousands of miles away, if you write the story really well. And I thought that's the strength. I have a great team. It's not just me. I have a small team, and they're all great. So for me, I'm very blessed to have them on my staff. You might know some of their, I don't do a lot of writing day to day, but you probably see their bylines, and they're to a T terrific. And so I knew I could count on their excellent writing to pull in readers, to get them to get you and other readers to care about somebody, again, they've never heard of before, may not have known about them, why the mayor of some town in Indiana who died, what he did for that community and why it's so his loss means to that community, that kind of stuff. I just thought obits in particular have a way of touching people in a way that the statistics do not. Close to 1 million people dead is horrifying, but you begin to care about it when you read about an individual life. So to me, that's how we could contribute.
I think before I turn it over and see if there are any questions in the audience, I think a question that most people probably have is, how do I get into the outside of dying? How do I, number one, die? Number two,
who cooked the food?
Is there a criteria, that a checklist of some sort that you have that somebody has to kind of fulfill in order to, or is it just a slow news week, a slow death week, or how does one get to be a news article versus a mention in a paid notice?
I don't like to have a tried and true formula. I don't believe in absolute criteria saying you have to fill these 10 things or else we're not going to do it. As the editor, I ultimately have to be captivated by what the story has to say. Does it speak to more than just the individual life? Is it something that people outside the immediate family would care about? Was there a palpable impact on that person's community, whether that person's community was here or in Tokyo or wherever? I like to write about, there was somebody asked me a similar question recently, and I pointed to an obituary we had about a Peruvian activist named Mama Angelica. And her son was abducted in Peru in the 80s. She was an indigenous woman. And I'd never heard of her, and I knew about a lot about the dictatorships in Chile and Argentina, where a lot of, thousands of people were disappeared or killed. And I never knew about Peru. And so I thought this was an opportunity to, and I was somewhat well versed in what happened in the Southern Cone. And I thought her story spoke to, would educate readers, would make it, relevant to show what a government can do. And she devoted her life to creating a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Peru. And she fulfilled it, from being a poor indigenous woman in Peru with probably no education, forced the hand of the government because of her activism. And to me, that was, and she'd been written about a lot, so there was enough to go by, versus, family lore. So it was documented. She was fascinating. I thought our readers would care about it. Did we have to do it? No. There are many stories we don't have to do, but to me, sometimes those are the most interesting. And then there are those you have to do. Because they're very prominent, and you'll get complaints if you don't. But to me, the most interesting people are the ones you don't have to do, and you do because of sheer interest, because we haven't written about that part of the world in a while, we haven't written about somebody who did that for a living in a long time. It's just variety. On any given day, you might find, two people who are somewhat similar, two guys in the newspaper, and we always get complaints, how come you don't do more women? Well, it's not up to us to put it in the newspaper, actually. The designers decide that. So we put far more online than we do in the paper immediately. So there's a wider variety online than what you immediately see in the newspaper. It can sometimes take weeks for the story to go into the print version. There was a woman, we just had a feminist publisher, in England. She started Virago Press in the early 70s. And so we have her online, but not in the paper yet. It's, to me, just the world is fascinating and filled with fascinating people. And I just, my staff and I decide who would be most interesting for variety, for diversity, that sort of thing.
And we should send all requests to Jeff Bezos, I'm assuming.
At washpost.com.
Yes. Okay. I think we have a roving mic coming for you. So Bill's going to come around and reach for you.
Oh, thank you. I'm curious about, I know this is an obituary that's probably been written, but what do you do when a former, twice impeached president that is the personification of evil, how do you write an obituary that describes who he is? Because he doesn't have a very good reputation from the beginning of his career.
And let me add to that too. What is front page news versus obituary, and do those sometimes cross over? Because I imagine if we're referring sometimes to former presidents, maybe that there may be some competition between the news, the front page section and your section.
Fortunately, so historically, some of the obituaries have been just stay in the back, and somebody will write an appreciation, or a good riddance kind of story on the front page, but that has changed considerably over the years. So the obituary has now been understood to be the final word on somebody. We don't pull punches. We're not the eulogy section. We don't write appreciations. We don't write eulogies. My wife's an investigative reporter, but I tell her that obituaries are the ultimate accountability story. And I believe that some families get upset when we mention sort of a 5 to 10 year stint working, working for the, in pen. And I say, well, if it's a public figure, you discover that, you have to put it in. And we just say it's what happened. We can't hide it, nor is it we would never want to hide it. Where you put it in the story, depending on who the person is, and is another question, news judgment. But it's a news story like any other. We don't whitewash.
Thank you.
Okay, here's the next question, Cindy.
Hi, my name is Bill Turner, and I'm enjoying the conversation very much. Mr. Bernstein, you're sharing your experience and your expertise with us. I am an avid reader of the obituaries, and not only that, but I clip the obituaries, and I have a clip file that is probably 2 inches thick. And I have one here from Thursday, November 13th. Richard Pearson dies. Post-obituary editor, was instant biographer. And I wondered if he was your predecessor who you were alluding to. Now, this is by Claudia Levy, Washington Post staff writer. And Mr. Pearson succeeded the Post's first obituary editor, J.Y. Smith, who helped preside over the creation of an obituary bureau with 6 writers. So there's some history, but I think this is a very interesting life, and I cut it out because I thought, oh, it's so ironic to have an obituary of an obituary writer. So I just wanted to share that, and I went through my file. I brought it thinking I might be able to introduce it at just a moment like this. But the other thing I wanted to comment on is a favorite book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. I think many of us know that book by Covey, John Covey. Stephen Covey, thank you. Yes, Stephen Covey. And of course, the first principle is begin with put first things first. But the second principle is begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. And Covey encourages people, especially people starting out in their career, write your own obituary. You write your own obituary as a way of kind of envisioning your life, and that gives you it kind of gives you purpose and direction and trajectory in your life. And I just I think that is really good advice, really good sound thinking. And I wondered if you have any thoughts on obituary do-it-yourselfers. Reasons for writing our own obituary or things to keep in mind. Okay, I'll stop. Thank you.
So that's a lot to work with. I would just say a couple quick things. So sad as well. Claudia died last year. I had to write her obituary. JY also, I wrote his obituary. Interestingly, though, Joe, his real name was Joe Smith, so he took the JY. His daughter is the voice of Lisa Simpson. Her name Yardley Smith. The Y in JY is Yardley. Rich Pearson was, in fact, the editor. He was a mentor. He was in very bad health for a lot of the time. But he was one of the brightest people I'd ever met at the newspaper. He had he had sleep apnea. Would stay up all night long reading books, and he knew more about the world than anybody I've ever met in my life. And he was also really funny. He was from Indiana, grew up on a farm, or Illinois, excuse me, grew up on a farm. And he's, if I remember correctly, his desire was to win the Pulitzer Prize. He was a chicken farmer. Sorry. I'm sorry, you gave me a lot to work with here. I think the thing I've learned about obituaries is that if you want to do one for obviously for yourself, for your immediate family, it's always wise, because I've found, especially when we were doing a lot more of the local stories of people who, we were doing for years, anybody who lived here, was that families really didn't know that much about the person that they were closest to, and nobody knew what got their mother, father, sister, brother, or even child sometimes, into the occupation that they did. What were the pivotal events in their life? What was the, why become a lawyer and not a doctor? Why a journalist and not a doctor? Whatever. Families just didn't have a clue of the most basic information about their immediate family. And one funny story: there was a woman who called us about her husband. This happened to a colleague of mine, and said, "My husband has died. He served, in the Navy, and here's his obit." And my colleague was going through fact-checking, as we always do, and every ship that the wife listed was, Coast Guard vessel. And she called back and said, "Ma'am, you said your husband was in the Navy, and here's all these ships he was on. He commanded this and that, and he was the chief officer on this." And she goes, "Oh, it had something to do with ships." That's it's always wise to prepare your own obituaries for your family, not necessarily for post-publication, but just. I personally think, I'm fascinated by my own immediate family and what what drove them to do the things that they did in life. Not any of them are going to get a post-obit, but it's just for my own knowledge, for family history, for genealogy.
Hi, Adam, thank you. And thank you for you and your team's work over the years, which I've studiously read over decades, well before you. There is a film made in the last decade called Obit, period, about the New York Times Obit team. Fascinating. But the thing I found most striking about how it was introduced and how the writers were addressed was, their whole life they say, I know you're an obit writer. What a dismal occupation. It must be terrible. And of course, they all say, no, it's not. After you get rid of the first paragraph of what happened to the person, 90% of what we do is celebratory. That's the key word.
Oh, no. So I take your point up to a point.
Up to a point.
Because it's not a celebration of a life. It's just explaining the life. You don't have to like the person. You don't have to hate the person. You just need to, it's not a judgmental thing. It's just, you need to, by the time that you're done with that story, you should have a keen understanding of what motivated the person, for better, for worse. But it's lively expository writing. It's sort of, the analogy that I often use is that in our desk, it's like the TV show MASH. We're laughing a lot. I mean, we're laughing, but we're having a collegial experience. We're not the mortuary. And so they're really bright people that I work with. They're a lot of fun. We have, we're trying to find the most fun anecdotes and details for any given story. So in that respect, it's a, we're not showing over-reliance on reverence. But it is and the documentary is great, even if it is about that other people.
Yes, I recommend it.
And they all are engaged in their job. It's all about it's a hunt for facts against against the clock, against families that may not know the answers. It's a great movie. Also, just to take one more point from the previous question, I forgot I was going to mention. You're really lucky because all our archives are gone. I remember when I first got the job. I've been doing this since '99, and up until the recent ownership, all our archives, photos and clippings, were in these giant library stacks. And every time somebody died, I would have to go down there and spool the thing open and go and find the file. And there would be these wonderful yellowed clippings from the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And the beautiful thing about it, and something that one of the writers in the documentary mentioned, is that not only do you get the story, the feature, the profile that may have been written about the person, but you get the context around it. The advertisements for Brill Cream, holiday magazine, subscription request. Things that really put the person in his or her time that you just can't get when you're looking through computerized news clips, which is Nexus and Factiva, things like that are just factual and bland. It's useful, but you just don't get the same historical context that you do.
Thank you.
Going back to one of the other questions, too, since you suggest that we all write our own obituaries, does that mean you have also written your own obituary at this point?
No, it won't be around, and I have certain requests for who to write it or not to write it, but
but nothing in a file. Nothing in a file ready to go. Did I see?
I have a very brief one. You mentioned Angus Phillips. Is it Angus Phillips? Is that
Joe Smith?
Richard the writer for the Post who did the Queen's Obit.
Oh, Adrian Higgins.
Adrian Higgins. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm thinking of another Post writer years and years ago, who I think was the fishing writer, whom I also enjoy. But Adrian Higgins is gone, and I'm very sorry to see he's gone.
Only he moved.
Okay.
Gone.
But I really enjoyed his nature columns and his gardening columns and everything. And where is he now, and what is he writing about?
He's retired and in London and does whatever he wants, and will write for me. He does some advanced obit writing for me. But when you said gone, it reminded me, if I may share with you my favorite correction. So Richard Pearson, my former editor, said whenever it would drive his own boss crazy, the Metro editor. And because the Metro editor would go out into the community and try and drum up subscriptions for the Post, and his line to her was, "You should go out there in the community and you should say this." Back when the price for the Washington Post, 25 cents at the time, is worth it for the corrections alone. But my favorite correction was from the London Daily Telegraph, who mistakenly buried, do you remember Tex Ritter, the singer? His wife was an actress, not a particularly famous one, but an actress. And she was in a nursing home somewhere in England for some, or no, she was in a nursing home, but the Daily Telegraph wrote about her because they was writing about kind of more obscure actors. And they wrote the obituary appeared, and it turned out they made a mistake because one of their tipsters says, "Oh, she's gone," but it was to another wing of the building. So the obit editor, actually a very fun guy named Andrew Mackay, wrote the best essay about this experience, and he said basically, an apology to Mrs. Ritter, and how he really enjoyed getting to know her and all the the fun details he was able to extract about her in preparation for the story, and that he wished her a very long life, similar to that of a woman named Cookie Hoogthorpe, who in 1938 the Daily Telegraph also prematurely buried, and she used a clipping of the Daily Telegraph forever after that, for 50 years, to send back her electricity bills marked deceased.
Before we turn the mic over to Pat Clark, our next questioner, I just wanted to acknowledge our previous questioners who weren't identified. It's Marcia Cohen. Marcy Cohen was our first questioner, and our next to last was Michael Canning and Tom Neal. That's just for our record so that we know who asked the questions. So we have a question here, and then I'll bring it over to you.
One quick thing, I won't elaborate. My great-grandfather was shot in 1889 or 1890, around then, because he was an editor of a newspaper, and he was pro-temperance, and a saloon keeper came by and shot him, and the notice of his death went out even though he hadn't died. But my question for you is, in addition to whatever else you've said, what are the difficult decisions you have to make? You've kind of been pretty straight about it, it's this or it's that, but are there certain difficult things you've had to decide?
In what sense? About what to put in a story?
Yes. Or what to acknowledge or whatever.
In the introduction, it was mentioned that one of my favorite obits was about Billy Wilder, who I also happen to think is one of the great filmmakers of all time. And his advice was, before he prepared a movie, he collected 300 great ideas, knowing that only 150 would be able to actually make it in. The best 150 could make it in. So this is the struggle all the time about, I've had a colleague of mine who's just retired, Matt Schudel, who is a great writer. He still writes occasionally, but he would always, I tell him, "Hey Matt, this story looks great, could you do it?" And he goes, "I don't know, I don't ever heard of him." And by the end of the day, you couldn't get him to, it was like a 3-part section. It was a 3-part series, because he had found so many fascinating things. And, I think the best approach is skepticism, and constant curiosity about, when you go, "Wow, that's a great detail," as opposed to, "It's just another detail." Because we're not writing books. It shouldn't just be, I don't need to fill if I write something, I don't need to list every film Angela Lansbury was in. I need to list the few that, make a point. She played the mother of, Elvis and Warren Beatty, and I can't remember the third person. And Elvis Presley, who was only 3 years younger, would always send him Mother's Day cards. So, that's funny, and so that goes in. That's why I don't put in 1 or 2 other films that are just in her resume but don't necessarily resonate. So my view is, you don't put it in for the sake of putting it in. You put it in because you're supposed to. It reveals something either about the character of the person, because it's funny or poignant or wry, or has some insight into the larger culture, or has some historical importance. It has to be more than just a fact. Does that kind of answer the question?
Oh, because the Post is trying to be... Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Debbie Hanrahan. I'm a guest, and I'm loving this program. Do you ever worry about getting the history wrong? You're trying to be the newspaper of record. You're vying with the New York Times. When you have a controversial, important historical figure who dies, are you looking over your shoulders and wondering, 10 years from now, are we going to get this wrong? Or does that not matter at the time you write the obituary?
Can I piggyback on that, because I think your point is illustrated by a recent death the actress Anne Heche, who was a little bit controversial in terms of how her or when her obituary was presented. So I don't know if that goes to the historical, but certainly there could be some controversy over accuracy.
Or Tony Dow,
Yes.
whose wife thought he was dead, mistakenly. I don't know if that's an insight into their marriage or not, but some things you can't help. Obviously, like anything else, you don't want to make a mistake. And that's where the craft of obit writing is far more difficult than people imagine, because these are stories, and this is why I continue to do the job. They're more important, in my view, than just sort of the ephemera that accounts for most of the daily news coverage. Obviously, it's important to write about what your favorite president is doing and what what else is going on in the news. But to me, the value of what we do is that it's something that people care about. Obviously, from your clippings, you probably not many people here carry clippings of what's going on at the agriculture department. So yes, I mean, we have to be accurate. And that's why, I edit the story and then it goes through a copy editor. I actually have another person behind me who's not technically an editor, but I value her insight greatly and say, can you back check it? Because as you know, newspapers move fast, or any publication, content providers. I'm a content provider. Things move very quickly these days. So we don't have a lot of backstops the way we used to when it was publication today for tomorrow. Now it's racing it online. So the speed is our enemy. There's I think there's a misconception among some people who don't write, some people in the newsroom. The biggest misconception is somebody dies, can you just throw up 3 paragraphs? I don't mean vomit, but sometimes it comes across that way. Can you throw up 3 paragraphs about this person who has just died? We need to capture the Twitter trending, we need to surf that Twitter wave. And I'm like, you don't understand. It's not like instant coffee. You have to bring some kind of knowledge, or else you're going to look like a fool. Sometimes you look like a fool. I'm not above and beyond that. But I try and minimize it. And, I remember it was when Sandy Berger died, and he was somebody who got into a little bit of trouble. He didn't commit a terrible crime or anything, but he committed a crime. We didn't have one ready, and they wanted something fast. I'm like, either get an expert in the subject to write it, or give me a little bit more time, because I don't want to put something wrong, and then we got to waste time correcting it. And so, that's the delicate part of what we do, because we understand people care about them a lot more. It's a sensitive subject, because it touches a lot of people. So you have to get it right, and you have to also make it compelling. And you have to, you have a lot of pressure from other people who want that from you right away. And you're trying to put the brakes on. And so there's a lot going on.
Adam, what happened? I was just going to move on to the next question, but what happened to the Post's morgue? You said that it went away.
The clippings are, I want to say it may be at MLK Library, maybe.
So it wasn't destroyed, it's just preserved in another...
Yeah, it was not destroyed, but are essentially inaccessible. And the photos, even more to my dismay, because the photo archive is, it was beautiful and vast. And those are in some vault in Columbia, Maryland. And it would require extraordinary efforts to get anything from there. So, it's...
Is there a reason why those went away?
Because it's not...
They
it
assume
was
you
just
can get it
taking up
digitally?
space, and they assume you can get it digitally. If you want a photo, we'll get you an AP photo. To me, a great obituary is not just the story, but also the art that accompanies it, the photo. It's the photo that's going to draw you in. I remember going back, my former editor, Richard Pearson, was so upset when Ava Gardner, for many reasons, upset when Ava Gardner died. And most newspapers pull whatever something happens, let's get a picture of it and put it in. It's the thing that happened today. The obituary that ran, the story goes on to explain she was one of the most beautiful actresses ever in cinema, And the picture showed her of like when she was about 90 with an eye hanging out. It was just, or Cary Grant, was shown in a hospital bed or something like that. It made no sense whatsoever. And so we're fighting. He used to say, "I don't have time to write the story and teach history." And that's sort of the tension as well sometimes, where you're doing a quick deep dive into history, trying to explain it accurately, sometimes within a matter of hours. Complicated lives, and sometimes it's more artfully achieved than others. And then you also have to get the best picture to accompany it, and when all our best pictures are inaccessible, you have to sort of hope and pray that the photo, I have to be very specific sometimes about what my request is, because somebody on the photo desk, granted that person is also extraordinarily busy, I have to make my case literally every day, to get a good photo to accompany or compelling photo, vivid photo that puts the life in context.
I'm going to leave it up to Dr. Gueli to bring the program to a conclusion, but we do have at least one more question.
Martha Jewett, thank you so much for your gifted work. But I'm always struck in reading them. I wish I had known this before they died. I wish I'd oftentimes in reading an obit, and I wondered if you ever thought of putting it together as a book of some of the great pieces that you've done.
What was the question?
The question was whether...
The question was to compile existing obituaries into a collection or a book.
We've thought about it. We did one many years ago. It was a random selection of 17 I don't know why, 17. Somebody thought that was just a cool number. We haven't done it as well as, again, the Daily Telegraph has these, if you haven't read them, they collect it by military they'll have a whole book of military obits, they'll have a whole book of rogues, because they're, it's like every degenerate member of the House of Lords. And it's wonderful reading. And then, some bongo playing member of the House of Lords. And then, but we never have. But I've always thought along those lines. If you know anybody, feel free to mention it to your friends in the publishing industry. But the first part of your statement was something about. But there was something else, and I can't remember what it triggered an idea. Oh, it was about sitting at the bar. What it was is. I didn't mention it, but whenever I write something or I encourage other writers to, I kind of want to get the feel of what's it like sitting next to that person. Now, I'll give you a very quick example, and then maybe, I don't know if we have to wrap up, but somebody wrote an advance obit. I don't tend to talk a lot about advance obits because I find it kind of ghoulish or just disrespectful. But I'll give you one example because I think it illustrates this really well, and it's a respectful anecdote. So we prepared an advance obituary for Kitty Dukakis, who's not dead, but I thought she's a very interesting person. And the most interesting aspect of the story, this was a freelance writer wrote it, and just wrote a line, not to do with obviously her mental health and alcohol problems, but it was one line in the story, and it said she worked while First Lady of Massachusetts, she worked with refugees. That to me was intriguing, but it was just like this passing line. And so I asked the writer, find more. And he just said, well, she wrote, all he was, worked with refugees in Cambodia, or Cambodian refugees. And I said, well, okay, but there's still, what's that mean? And I found one article, one interview with the Boston Globe that she found. It was I dig and I dig and I dig and I found it. She gave this great anecdote, and I can imagine her talking about this, sitting next to me at the bar, where it was, there was a family in Boston who went to her to ask for help because there was an orphan in Cambodia that they were related to, and they couldn't get him out after the Khmer Rouge rule. And so they begged her, because of her, she had some interest in refugees, but they asked her to go to Cambodia to see if they could locate this kid whose immediate family was now settled near Boston. So she explains that she flew to somewhere along the Thai-Cambodian border, and went to some off-the-grid refugee camp that was off limits basically to everybody. And as a dignitary, American dignitary, wife of a well-known politician, fell to her knees in front of some camp functionary who was guarding it, a 17-year-old probably with a gun saying, no, you can't get in here. And she fell to her knees and begged and pleaded to be let in to locate this kid, and did it, and brought the kid home. And then, not only that, but the kid, we explained, went on to graduate from high school and college in Massachusetts. And, I'm not all about the sunny anecdotes, but to me it was a vivid illustration more than what the story was capable of. More so than just she liked helping refugees, which is, glazed, you can easily glaze over that. Her words about it are far more compelling than my own, just remembering this. But essentially, she gave this wonderful anecdote about dropping to her knees in front of some hapless border, prison guard, essentially, and begging to let this orphan out and taking him back to Massachusetts. To me, that's the far more powerful in what the story was capable of than what it would have been otherwise.
Well, I'm sorry. I think we are running out of time. So I'm sorry for any questions that haven't been answered. But I think we could do this for another hour at least with everybody here. So thank you so much on behalf of AOI. And I know I want to turn this over to Marcia, who has an appreciation for you as well.
Adam, we're so happy that you're here today, and thanks to your wit and understanding of human nature, you clearly put the it in Obituaries. So the board thought that you earned a world tour that is kicked off by today's event hosted by the Association for the Oldest Inhabitants of Washington. So thank you.
Or maybe the Underworld tour.
Even better.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill and Paul, for the poster.
Thank you so much. It was a delight, and anybody has any leftover chocolate cake, let me know. Thank you so much. Thank you.
In addition to a goodie bag and a poster, we do have a certificate of appreciation for you on behalf of AOI. Thank you not only for coming, but for also kind of revealing to us how important it is to be able to tell these stories. We are kind of living history here, but also you are providing history of DC, not only for people like us, but for future historians and future genealogists, and how important that is to have down. So we have this. So on behalf of AOI, we have and your poster. We want to give you a certificate. So thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. And one last PSA for everybody: vote. We are in early voting for DC, so please get out and vote. DC, Maryland, Virginia, wherever it is you're coming from. Vote like your lives depend on it, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much.